Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The heat inside Forward Operating Base Chapman felt like punishment. 118 degrees, no shade, no mercy. Outside, rotor blades carved through Afghan dust as a Black Hawk medevac descended, kicking up sandstorms that turned sunlight into a golden haze. Inside the triage tent, under flickering fluorescent lights, one woman stood still amid chaos. Clare Stevens, 38, small frame, calm hands, green eyes that had seen too much. Her scrubs were faded, her boots covered in layers of dust, the kind that never washed off, no matter how many times she tried. Around her the noise built like a storm. Radios blared emergency codes, gurneys squeaked across uneven ground, medics shouted vital signs. Incoming wounded, ETA 90 seconds, multiple casualties, priority alpha. Claire didn't flinch. Her hands moved with quiet precision, checking IV lines, prepping surgical trays, counting instruments not by sight but by touch. Every motion had rhythm, confidence, the kind of control that came from experience, not textbooks. And that apparently was her crime. Because standing across from her, with a gleaming stethoscope and arrogance sharper than a scalpel, was Dr. Marcus Webb, 29 years old, freshly imported from Johns Hopkins, carrying enough ego to fill the entire tent. He'd been here 1 week, and already everyone knew Webb didn't respect field nurses. He made sure of that. "Out of my way, nurse," he said, brushing past her with deliberate force. "We'll handle this properly from now on. Real doctors take charge." His voice carried, loud enough for everyone to hear, the other visiting residents from Ivy League hospitals, the combat medics, even the radio operators. Beside him, Dr. Ashley Chen, Stanford-trained and social media famous, adjusted her surgical cap for her phone's camera, angling just right to catch the chaos behind her. Dr. David Park, Yale's orthopedic golden boy, checked his designer watch, calculating how many more weeks remained in his rotation before he could return to air-conditioned hospitals far away from dust and danger. Claire said nothing. She never did. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. Outside, the thundering helicopter grew closer. Dust stormed through the tent flaps. The smell of antiseptic mixed with jet fuel and blood, that unique, sickening scent that marked every forward medical facility in this desert. Captain James Rodriguez, commanding officer of the Chapman Medical Unit, stepped inside, tall, composed, eyes sharp. A man who'd seen war strip away every illusion about rank and education. He served enough deployments to know that when things went bad, it wasn't the resumes that saved lives. It was the people who stayed calm. He glanced at Claire as he entered, giving a brief nod of acknowledgement, the kind of respect earned through results, not rank. "Everyone ready?" he asked. "Ready, sir," Claire said. Her tone was quiet, controlled, military. Rodriguez caught it, the clipped cadence, the way she addressed him like a soldier, not a nurse. But before he could think on it, Webb's voice cut through the moment. "Captain, we'll take over primary triage from now on. No offense to local staff, but it's time for this operation to follow real medical standards." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "You'll coordinate with my existing team, doctor. They've handled over 600 trauma cases this month alone." "Band-aids and adrenaline," Webb muttered. "This isn't medicine, it's improvisation." He didn't notice the combat medics' exchange looks. That quiet, tired kind of contempt soldiers reserve for people who think war can be managed like a classroom experiment. Outside, the radio operator called out coordinates. "Chopper inbound, IED explosion, 3 casualties." Dust and noise swallowed the world as the Black Hawk touched down. Claire's head tilted instinctively, not toward the noise but the rhythm of it. Every combat medic recognized that reflex, the way veterans listen to rotor stress, pitch, descent rate. It told them everything: payload weight, mechanical strain, casualty count. Webb didn't notice. He was still lecturing about proper trauma protocols. The helicopter hit the landing zone hard. Within seconds, stretchers appeared through the haze, Marines burned, bleeding, broken. Combat medics rushed in, voices blending into a single urgent rhythm. Claire was already moving. She didn't run, she glided. Straight to the first casualty, a 19-year-old specialist, conscious but pale, leg shredded by shrapnel. Minor trauma, Webb declared after a glance. Send him to Station 1. Claire's voice cut softly through the tension. Doctor, check his pupils. Webb frowned. Excuse me. Blast concussion. It presents delayed neurological symptoms. Pupillary reaction will tell you severity. Stick to your assigned duties, Nurse Stevens, Webb snapped. Medical diagnoses are above your pay grade. Claire's eyes stayed on the Marine's pupils, one slightly dilated. She redirected the stretcher toward Station 2 with a motion so subtle that Webb didn't notice. But Sergeant Williams, a seasoned combat medic, did. He gave a small nod. Field instinct recognized field instinct. The second stretcher came in hot, blood everywhere. Marine Lance Corporal Chen, 22, abdominal wound, rapid pulse, dropping pressure, dying. Webb took command. Prep Operating Room 2 for exploratory surgery, standard abdominal trauma protocols. Claire stepped forward. Doctor, moving him will kill him. You need field stabilization first. Nurse Stevens, Webb said sharply, you are not qualified to question me. Prepare for transport. His blood pressure's dropping. If you move him, he'll go into vascular collapse before you reach the table. The tent fell silent. Webb turned, voice rising. Are you accusing me of incompetence? Claire didn't blink. I'm telling you he'll die if you move him now. Captain Rodriguez stepped closer, tension crackling between rank and reason. Nurse Stevens, what's your medical background? 18 months field experience here, sir, she said, eyes fixed on the dying Marine. Before that, a pause, the kind of pause that hides more truth than words ever could. Civilian nursing, various hospitals. Rodriguez didn't believe it, not entirely. The patient's vitals nosedived, blood pressure collapsing, pulse fatting. Webb hesitated, finally checking the monitor. Claire was right, but pride is a hard thing to surrender. Fine, he said tightly. Preliminary stabilization, but I'll handle all procedures. He fumbled with instruments, hands trembling. The medics around him exchanged glances. Everyone could see it, textbook skill collapsing under battlefield pressure. Then a deep, gut-shaking boom. A mortar round struck 200 meters away. The tent shook. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Enemy fire, someone shouted. Webb froze. We can't operate under these conditions. Doctor, Claire said quietly, he doesn't have time to wait for perfect conditions. I am not performing emergency surgery during active bombardment. Another explosion closer. The ground shuddered, lights flickered. The Marine flatlined. And in that split second, something inside Claire snapped, not with fear but focus. The kind that takes over when there's no one else left to do the impossible. Scalpel, she said. Webb stared. You're not. Scalpel, she repeated. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Rodriguez looked at her and saw it. The quiet command presence of someone who'd been here before, someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Give her the instruments, he ordered. Webb stepped back, pale. This is absurd, she's a nurse. Then save him yourself, Claire said without looking up. Another explosion shook the ground. Dust filled the air. She didn't flinch. Her scalpel traced precise lines across torn flesh, hands steady even as the world roared around her. The third mortar round struck closer, shrapnel tore through the tent. Equipment crashed, chaos everywhere. And Claire didn't move. except to shield the patient with her own body as debris fell. When the dust settled, silence filled the tent. Her scrubs were shredded, her back exposed. 3 parallel surgical scars crossed her ribs, deliberate, even healed long ago. And between them, a tattoo. USNFS Fallujah 2007, Navy Flight Surgeon, Combat Zone. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the generators seemed to hum quieter. Rodriguez stepped forward slowly. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Lieutenant Commander Clare Mitchell. The name hung in the air like a secret no one was supposed to know. Dr. Park whispered, "Flight surgeon, that can't be." Chen's livestream phone was still recording. Thousands of viewers were watching in real time as the truth unfolded. Sergeant Williams snapped to attention unconsciously. Every combat medic knew that name. The flight surgeon from Medical Station Alpha. The one who'd operated on herself after treating 57 Marines during a 14-hour siege. Webb stared speechless. Claire, or rather Lieutenant Commander Clare Mitchell, ignored them all, continuing her field surgery with flawless control. Blood pressure rising, pulse stabilizing. The Marine lived. And just as she finished her sutures, heavy footsteps thundered outside. The tent flaps parted. A man in immaculate uniform entered, silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. Admiral James Richardson. He stopped mid-step, eyes falling on her back, the scars, the tattoo, the living legend who wasn't supposed to exist. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the Admiral, a man whose authority stretched across half a continent, came to full attention and saluted her. The tent had never been that silent. Even the wounded seemed to hold their breath. Admiral James Richardson stood motionless, hand raised in a perfect salute. Dust drifted through a beam of sunlight that cut across his uniform, catching the silver in his hair and the disbelief in his eyes. For 7 years, he'd believed she was dead. "Lieutenant Commander Clare Mitchell," he said at last, his voice rough with something between awe and guilt. "They told us you died with the others at Medical Station Alpha." Claire didn't look up from the Marine she'd just saved. Her hand stayed steady, cleaning the sutures, tapping the line, checking vitals. Only when the monitor steadied, strong pulse, stable pressure, did she speak. "Easier that way, Admiral," she said quietly, "for everyone involved." The Admiral lowered his salute slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. Around them, Webb, Chen, Park, and every medic in the tent stood frozen, an entire field hospital suspended between legend and reality. Rodriguez found his voice first. "Sir, you know her." Richardson nodded once. "Better than I ever thought I would. She saved half my brigade when Alpha fell." He turned to Claire again. "They said you were hit, that the medevac never made it out." "It made it," Claire replied. "Barely, and I wasn't ready to come back." The Admiral studied her, then the shredded remains of her scrubs, the scars that spoke louder than any report. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed, formal, reverent. "Ma'am, on behalf of every Marine you saved in Fallujah," he stepped forward, heels clicking against the dusty floor. "It's an honor to see you alive." Across the tent, Webb's face went pale. His perfect posture sagged under the weight of realization. The nurse he'd dismissed, the woman he'd humiliated in front of everyone, was the Navy's most decorated combat surgeon. But what hit hardest wasn't her title. It was that she'd never used it. Outside, the base siren wailed in all clear. The bombardment had ended. Inside, a different kind of reckoning began. "Dr. Webb," Richardson said sharply without turning his head. Webb snapped to attention instinctively. "Sir." "You attempted to overrule the most experienced battlefield surgeon in this theater," the Admiral said, his tone cold as steel. "Explain yourself." I had no way of knowing, sir," Webb stammered. "Her records listed her as a field nurse. "You didn't ask," Richardson interrupted. You assumed. Each word landed like a hammer. You saw a title on a badge and judged competence by credentials. You let arrogance decide who was worth listening to. That arrogance almost cost a Marine his life. The air in the tent thickened. Every resident doctor, every medic, every orderly listened like soldiers at formation. Webb opened his mouth to defend himself, then shut it. There was nothing left to say. Claire didn't gloat. She just kept her attention on her patient, adjusting the IV drip, voice calm. BP holding at 92/60. He's stable. Richardson's expression softened as he turned back to her. You never told anyone who you were. Because it didn't matter, she said. Out here names don't save lives, hands do. For a long moment the Admiral said nothing. Then slowly he exhaled. You should have been promoted years ago, Navy Cross, maybe a star of your own. Politics buried it. They said the details of Alpha were too classified for ceremony. I prefer it that way. Claire stripped off her torn gloves. The medal wouldn't have brought anyone back. The Admiral's aide entered with fresh intel sheets, but Richardson waved him off. Later, his attention stayed fixed on Claire. You've been living under an alias, serving as a nurse in a forward facility. Why? Her answer came after a pause that felt heavier than the heat outside. Because command decisions kill people, sir, and I'd already made enough of them. Rodriguez caught her tone, quiet, almost pleading beneath its calm. The weight of someone who'd carried too many ghosts. Richardson gave a slow nod. Understood. He turned toward the medical staff again. Effective immediately, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell resumes active duty status. She will serve as Chief Medical Officer for this facility. Murmurs rippled through the tent. Shock, respect, disbelief. Sergeant Williams straightened like a cadet. Yes, ma'am, he said instinctively, pride in his voice. Webb looked like he might collapse. Sir, please, my intention was never. The road to hell, Doctor, is paved with good intentions, the Admiral cut in. You'll remain on observer status. No patient contact without Commander Mitchell's authorization. Webb swallowed hard. Understood, sir. Claire turned slightly toward him, her tone softer than anyone expected. Dr. Webb. He looked up, hesitant. Next time you think someone beneath you doesn't know enough, ask what they've seen, not where they studied. He nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. When the Admiral left, the tent slowly came back to life. Generators hummed. Medics resumed triage. But something fundamental had shifted. The air carried respect now, heavy, unspoken, absolute. Rodriguez lingered by Claire's side as she cleaned her instruments. Commander, if you don't mind my saying. She looked up. Drop the title, Captain. I'm still the same person who was here this morning. Maybe, he said, but the rest of us are. They shared a small smile, rare, tired, the kind born from mutual understanding. Outside, the helicopter blades faded into the distance, carrying the stabilized Marine toward a higher-level facility. Inside, the story of what had just happened began to spread across the base like wildfire. The nurse who wasn't a nurse. The Admiral who saluted her scars. That night, after the chaos quieted and the tent lights dimmed, Claire sat alone at her workstation. The adrenaline had finally drained away, leaving only silence and the ache that came after holding everything together too long. She pulled off her boots, unrolled the hem of her scrub pants, stared at her hands. The same hands that had saved hundreds, the same hands that had once trembled as she'd stitched her own arm closed under fire. Outside, the desert was vast and merciless. The wind carried the low hum of generators and distant gunfire, blending into a kind of restless lullaby. She reached for her metal canteen, took a sip, and closed her eyes. 7 years hiding behind a false name. 7 years pretending to be less than she was so she could keep doing the one thing that still made sense, saving lives quietly. She thought of the Marines who hadn't made it out of Alpha. Of the screams that night, the heat, the smell of smoke and burning gauze, and the sound of her own voice over the comms, calm and clear even as shrapnel tore through her side. Keep pressure on that wound. We're not done yet. Sometimes surviving felt like betrayal. A soft knock broke her trance. "Commander." It was Dr. Chen. No phone, no recording, just a young woman stripped of filters and confidence. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began. "I came here thinking this was just a career stepping stone. I didn't understand what real medicine meant until today." Claire regarded her quietly. "Real medicine means you'll lose people, and you'll lose sleep over every one of them. But if you keep your humanity, you'll still be a doctor worth trusting." Chen nodded. "Could you teach me, not the textbooks, the other stuff?" Claire's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You start tomorrow, at dawn." Hours later, long after most of the base slept, Captain Rodriguez sat outside the command tent, cigarette glowing in the dark. He watched Claire walk past, her silhouette framed by floodlights, heading toward the landing zone where medevac birds idled like giant insects under the moon. "Commander," he called softly. She turned. "Captain, you could have gone home years ago. Why stay?" Her gaze drifted toward the horizon where the mountains swallowed the night. "Because out there," she said, nodding toward the battlefield, "someone's bleeding right now, and they need a pair of steady hands." Rodriguez crushed the cigarette under his boot. "If the Navy had 10 more of you, we'd win every war." Claire shook her head. "Wars aren't won by people like me. We just make sure the living get a chance to go home." She walked away before he could reply. The next morning brought heat, dust, and the rhythm of helicopters again. But this time the tent moved differently. Webb observed in silence. Chen assisted without posing. Park took notes instead of giving orders, and every medic followed Claire's lead. Under her calm instruction, they learned not just procedures but instinct. How to read a patient's breath before a monitor screamed. How to feel for life in places machines couldn't reach. When one young corpsman hesitated over a wounded soldier, Claire guided his hands gently. "Trust what you see. Fear makes you blind. Focus, breathe, move." By noon, 3 lives had been saved that would have been lost yesterday. By evening, the arrogance that once filled the tent had been replaced by purpose. Later that day, a supply convoy arrived with a small envelope sealed in wax. The courier saluted. "Message for Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, classified." Claire accepted it with a wary glance. Few things in Afghanistan came sealed in wax. Inside, a single line of text. "Medical Station Alpha, survivors confirmed alive. Extraction pending, qualified surgical officer." Her breath caught. For years she'd believed she was the only one, that everyone else had died in that firestorm, but now 3 confirmed alive. Her team. She folded the message carefully, slid it into her pocket, and looked around the tent filled with new faces, new lives depending on her. For the first time in 7 years, the past wasn't just memory. It was calling her back. That night, under a sky littered with stars, Claire sat alone outside the medical tent. The wind carried the faint echo of rotor blades from distant patrols. Somewhere out there, people she'd left behind were waiting. People she'd thought she'd buried with her old identity. She traced the scars along her ribs, the physical reminders of what survival had cost. Each one a debt unpaid. "Sometimes," she whispered to herself, "dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." A medic passing by glanced over. "Ma'am." Claire smiled faintly, just thinking out loud. She stood, tightening her boots, looking toward the horizon where darkness met the desert. Somewhere beyond those mountains, the ghosts of Alpha were still breathing. And soon she would have to decide whether to keep hiding from the past or walk straight back into it. How do you return to the place that nearly killed you? That question followed Claire through the long, sleepless night after the message arrived. The small, sealed envelope lay beside her cot like a ghost, innocent in shape, deadly in meaning. Survivors confirmed alive. 3 words that cracked open 7 years of silence. She spent those years burying her past under new names, new uniforms, new missions. But the past wasn't done with her. Not yet. The morning sun rose in molten streaks across the Afghan sky, painting everything in shades of copper and ash. Helicopters came and went, medics shouted vitals, and the base moved on as if yesterday hadn't rewritten history. But inside the triage tent, Claire couldn't focus on routine. Every heartbeat reminded her that somewhere, possibly not far, 3 people she'd left behind were still alive. Her team, her family. Captain Rodriguez entered mid-shift, reading her expression instantly. "You look like someone who's already somewhere else." Claire didn't deny it. "You ever think you buried a part of yourself, Captain, only to realize it was still breathing?" He studied her carefully. "That envelope." She gave a small nod. "Survivors from Medical Station Alpha." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "That's impossible." "So was me being alive," she said quietly, "but here we are." By midday, she sat alone in the secure comms tent, headset on, staring at a flickering green screen that displayed an encrypted connection to a number that technically didn't exist. "Blackwater Medical Division," the operator said, voice crisp and cold. "This is Atlas." Claire hesitated for a heartbeat. It had been 7 years since she'd used that line. "This is Viper 7, request mission briefing, Alpha extraction." There was a pause, then another voice came through, rough, older, familiar. "Viper 7, holy hell, I thought you were dead." "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. Colonel Marcus Steele had been her handler back when she was the Navy's top combat surgeon assigned to covert operations. He'd coordinated missions no one admitted existed. And now, his voice carried the disbelief of a man hearing from a ghost. "You have no idea what kind of chaos you just stirred up," he said. "We've been tracking activity at the old station for months. Taliban converted the remains into a detention complex. Intelligence shows 3 heat signatures in the lower bunker. All human, all consistent with long-term captivity." Claire's fingers tightened around the mic. "Names." "We're 90% sure. Dr. Patricia Doc Williams, Captain Michael Rodriguez, Lieutenant Sarah Chen." Her chest constricted. She could see their faces as if no time had passed, the laughter, the blood, the desperate courage in that burning bunker. "They're alive," she whispered. "For now," Steele said. "But we've got a narrow window. Satellite imagery shows they're preparing relocation within 72 hours. Once they move, they're gone." "Then we don't have 72 hours," she said. Steele exhaled. "Claire, you don't have to do this. We can assign another flight surgeon." "There is no other flight surgeon," she interrupted. "Not one who knows that facility like I do. You know that." Silence stretched over the line. Finally, Steele said, "All right. If you're in, you lead the medical side. 4-person SEAL extraction team under your command. Stealth infiltration, 22-minute operation window. But Claire, you know what you're walking back into." "I've been walking in it for 7 years," she said. "Might as well finish the loop." By dusk, she'd already begun preparation. Every movement felt automatic, like muscle memory waking from deep sleep. The med bag she carried wasn't regulation issue, it was hers. The same battered leather kit she'd used in Fallujah, patched, worn, still functional. She packed carefully: surgical clamps, hemostats, vascular kits, field blood expander, chest tubes, a single vial of lidocaine. She didn't need much. When the world fell apart, you didn't count on equipment, you counted on hands. In the mirror above the wash basin, her reflection looked older than she remembered. The silver streaks in her hair had spread, her skin marked by years of sun and sleepless nights. But her eyes, they were the same, tired, unyielding. "Commander Mitchell." It was Webb standing awkwardly in the doorway. Gone was the arrogance. In its place, respect, humility, maybe even guilt. "I heard you're shipping out," he said quietly. "Classified," she replied, tightening the straps on her mid-pack. "I figured," he said, stepping closer. "Listen, about before, I was wrong, completely. I let my pride decide who was worth listening to. You saved that Marine's life and mine, too, in a way." She met his eyes. "Arrogance is easy to cure, Doctor. War does it faster than humility ever will." He nodded slowly. "If you come back, will you teach us the real medicine?" "If I come back," she said, "I'll teach you everything I know, starting with how not to die." At 500 the next morning, the air was sharp and cold. The sky still dark, the stars bright enough to feel close. Claire walked across the base toward the hangars, boots crunching against gravel. The Black Hawk sat ready, engines low, rotors slowly spinning like a heartbeat waiting to quicken. Captain Rodriguez waited by the loading ramp, holding a sealed case. Orders. She accepted it silently. Inside was her reinstated Navy identification. Lieutenant Commander Clare Mitchell, Flight Surgeon, United States Navy Medical Corps. Her old life, restored in laminated plastic. "Welcome back to active duty," he said. "Feels strange," she admitted, "like putting on a uniform that doesn't fit anymore." Rodriguez gave a half-smile. "Some ghosts deserve closure. Go bring yours home." The Black Hawk lifted off at 600, climbing through gray mist toward a classified forward staging base 100 kilometers north. The landscape below was all dust and ruin, villages half destroyed, valleys that had seen too much death. Inside the chopper, Claire sat opposite her extraction team. 4 Navy SEALs, faces calm, eyes sharp. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell, no relation, though the name coincidence drew a faint smirk from her. Petty Officer First Class David Park, steady, precise, the quiet professional. Petty Officer Maria Gonzalez, sharp-witted, fearless, demolition expert. Chief Petty Officer Thomas Wilson, old school, grizzled, and loyal. "Commander," Jake said over the engine roar, "we've reviewed your facility maps. That maintenance tunnel still viable?" "It should be," Claire replied. "Concrete structure, lower access east of the primary perimeter. Taliban reinforced the surface levels but didn't know the tunnels existed." Wilson grunted. "Convenient oversight." "Convenient," she echoed, "if you ignore the part where it's probably mined." A low whistle from Gonzalez. "This mission keeps getting better." Hours later, at the staging site, the team huddled over satellite imagery spread across a metal table. Claire traced the old blueprint lines with her finger, remembering every hallway, every emergency exit, every echo of that last night at Alpha. "The prisoners are here," she said, tapping the lower bunker. "The medical wing. I used it as a surgical station during the siege. There's a maintenance shaft that leads from this tunnel to the secondary generator room. We can enter here undetected if we move fast." Jake studied the layout. "Patrols cycle every 30 minutes. We get in, stabilize your people, and get out in 22. Extraction bird hovers at grid 37 Charlie. Any delays, we abort." "No aborts," Claire said flatly. "Those are my people." He met her gaze evenly. "Understood, but you know the risk. Once we break radio silence, every gun in that valley turns toward us." She nodded once. "Then we don't make noise." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot under a dim red light, staring at the ceiling, the hum of generators blending into the steady thump of her heartbeat. 7 years. 7 years since the siege. Since the smell of cordite and blood, the sound of screaming soldiers, the sight of her own arm torn open while she sutured herself with trembling fingers. Her chest ached not from fear but memory. She convinced herself that she stayed in the field to help others, but the truth was simpler. She stayed because she didn't know how to stop. A soft knock came at the door. Jake stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of bitter military coffee. Can't sleep either. Never could before a mission, she said. He sat across from her. You were there when the place fell. She nodded. 14 hours under siege, 57 wounded, only I walked out. He studied her quietly. And you came back anyway. Claire gave a small, sad smile. When you leave something unfinished, it never really lets you go. At 200 they moved out. Night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green and shadow. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants as they descended toward the valley. The wind cut sharp against exposed skin. Claire moved with practiced silence, rifle slung low, med-pack secured tight. She wasn't a soldier, but she'd been around them long enough to move like one. After 45 minutes of careful descent, they reached the old drainage culvert, the hidden entrance to the maintenance tunnels beneath Medical Station Alpha. Claire crouched beside the hatch, brushed away years of dust and grit. Her gloved fingers traced the edges of the welded metal, finding the exact spot where she'd once carved a faint mark, an arrow pointing home. It's still here, she whispered. Jake nodded. You lead the way, Commander. The tunnel was cold, damp, and claustrophobic. Their boots echoed softly against concrete as they moved in single file, weapons ready. The air smelled of rust and old fuel. Every step was a memory. Every corner a ghost. When they reached the final junction, Claire froze. Her flashlight beam fell on the faint outline of a handprint burned into the wall, hers. 7 years old, preserved in soot and smoke. She pressed her palm against it, and the world seemed to collapse into silence. Commander, Gonzalez whispered. Claire blinked, forcing herself back to the present. Let's move. They followed her into the lower access corridor. At the far end, a heavy steel door, new locks, fresh wiring. The Taliban had fortified the entrance. Wilson knelt beside it, unpacking a compact charge. Silent entry, 15 seconds. Make it 10, Jake murmured. 10 seconds later, the lock clicked open. The door swung inward with a low metallic groan. And there they were. 3 shapes lying on thin mats, pale under the green glow of the SEAL's night optics. One stirred weakly, coughing. The sound was human and alive. Claire's breath caught. Doc. Dr. Patricia Williams opened her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Claire, is that really you? Claire knelt beside her, tears blurring her vision. It's me, Doc, you're going home. Williams managed a weak smile. About damn time. As the SEALs secured the perimeter, Claire moved quickly from patient to patient. Captain Michael Rodriguez, malnourished, ribs visible, eyes still sharp despite the pain. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, breathing shallow, signs of infection and lung damage. All 3 alive, barely. Vitals weak but stable, she said into her mic. Immediate med evac required. Copy that, Viper 7, came the reply. Extraction bird inbound, 18 minutes. 18 minutes, to save 3 lives, to rewrite 7 years. Claire rolled up her sleeves. Then let's get to work. How do you keep your hands steady when the world starts shaking again? Claire asked herself that as she knelt beside the 3 survivors, pulse oximeter flickering in the dim green light. 7 years of captivity had reduced them to bone and willpower, but they were alive. Alive because they had believed someone would come. Now she was here. Doc Williams tried to sit up, voice rasping. You always were late to the party. Still the same sarcasm, Claire murmured, slipping an IV line into a trembling arm. That's a good sign. Rodriguez's eyes opened halfway. He looked older, face lined by starvation and memory. Told him you'd come, he whispered. Told him Viper 7 doesn't quit. Claire's throat tightened. You shouldn't have been right about that. Jake's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. Perimeter secure. No patrols within 50 meters. Copy, she answered. Start extraction prep. I need 10 minutes for stabilization. Gonzalez moved to cover the hallway, rifle ready. Wilson checked his watch. 15 minutes till exfil bird arrives. If we miss that window. We won't, Claire said. She moved with impossible calm. BP cuffs, saline bags, antibiotics. Her hands didn't tremble, not even as echoes of gunfire rolled faintly from the valley. She spent her whole life training for chaos like this. Doc Williams watched her work through half-closed eyes. You never stopped being a surgeon, did you? Claire smiled faintly. I tried, didn't take. Then faint and distant, a shout. Arabic, followed by the metallic clatter of a rifle dropped on concrete. Jake's tone shifted. Contact East Tower, we've been spotted. Wilson cursed under his breath. So much for silent entry. Hold position, Claire ordered. I'm not moving these patients until they can survive transport. Commander. She looked up sharply. They waited 7 years. They can't die on the runway. That ended the discussion. Outside, the first gunshots cracked through the stillness. Muffled echoes, then the sharper rhythm of returning fire. The SEALs moved like clockwork, controlled bursts, short calls, retreat by inches. Inside the bunker, the air thickened with dust and fear. Claire tuned it out. She learned long ago that panic kills faster than bullets. Lieutenant Chen's breathing grew ragged, shallow wheeze turning into a choke. Claire bent close, fingers tracing along her ribs. The sound, the wet rattle told her everything. Collapsed lung, she said quietly. Doc Williams tried to turn her head. Can she make it? Not unless I fix it now. Claire unzipped her med pack, pulled out a chest tube and scalpel. No anesthesia, no monitor, just instinct. Wilson glanced over. Ma'am, we need to move. Cover the door, she said, and don't look away. She made the incision cleanly, sliding the tube between ribs until a hiss escaped, a rush of trapped air. Chen gasped once, then drew a full breath for the first time in years. The sound filled the bunker like music. Claire taped the line, checked the pulse. She's stable. 2 contacts down, Jake called. But they're alert now. Reinforcements inbound from the west wall. How long? 10 minutes. Then we finish in 9. The next crisis hit immediately. Captain Rodriguez convulsed, body arching as his heart monitor shrieked warning tones. Pulse crashing, Claire said. She tore open his shirt. Old scars, new bruises, a belly sunken from hunger, her fingertips pressed below the sternum. Internal bleed, probably spleen. We move him, he dies. Doc Williams reached out, weakly gripping her wrist. You can't operate here, not again. Claire met her eyes. You remember what happened last time I did. Williams fell silent. They both remembered. The soldiers she couldn't save because she'd waited too long. Claire snapped her gloves tighter. Jake, I need light. He pulled a tactical lamp from his vest, angling the beam. Dust floated through the air like snow. Claire steadied her breath. Scalpel clamp pressure. Each movement was deliberate, silent, sure. Time slowed, heartbeats stretching between each cut. Blood pooled dark on the floor, slick beneath her knees. Got the bleed, she murmured, clamping vessel now. Rodriguez's pulse steadied, the monitor tone leveled. BP rising, Jake said quietly. He's holding. Claire exhaled once, long and slow. Her gloves were soaked crimson. Wilson stared. That was field surgery. Improvised medicine, she corrected, sealing the wound. Sometimes that's all there is. The radio crackled again. Viper 7, this is Raven 1. Extraction inbound. ETA 8 minutes. Copy, Raven. Gunfire intensified above. The walls trembled as explosions rolled through the compound. Gonzalez ducked back into the room, breath quick. They're trying to breach the south tunnel. We've got to move now or we'll be boxed in. Claire looked down at her patients. IV lines, bandages, monitors cobbled together from salvaged cables. None of them ready for transport. But staying meant dying. "Okay," she said. "We move, carefully. Rodriguez first, then Chen, then Williams." Wilson and Gonzalez lifted Rodriguez onto a stretcher. Jake secured Chen. The air inside the bunker thickened with smoke from nearby detonations. The ceiling shook. Bits of concrete rained down. "Go!" They slipped back into the tunnels, narrow, dark, the only way out. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them, shouts, boots, metal clanging on stone. Gonzalez dropped a small charge and triggered it as they rounded the corner. The explosion filled the passage with dust and fire, sealing the route behind them. "Tunnel clear," she yelled. Claire moved faster than she thought possible, gripping the IV bag above Rodriguez's stretcher to keep the flow steady. Her lungs burned, her hands slick with sweat and blood. Every turn looked the same, gray walls, shadows, ghosts. Her mind kept flashing back to another night, another evacuation through these same tunnels, her arm bleeding, her team dying one by one. Not this time, she told herself, not again. They reached the outer hatch just as the rumble of rotor blades began to thunder overhead. The night sky flashed with muzzle fire from the ridge as Taliban fighters poured out of the compound, shooting blindly toward the noise. "Raven 1 on station," the pilot's voice boomed through the headset. "Smoke markers." Jake popped a flare, red smoke swirling upward into chaos. The Blackhawk swooped in, side gunners opening up with suppressive fire that shook the valley. "Move, move." Wilson and Gonzalez carried Rodriguez through the hatch, rounds sparking off nearby rocks. Claire followed, bent low over Chen, shielding her head as debris rained down. The world became noise and dust and light, everything happening at once. Bullets snapping past, rotor wash whipping sand into blinding clouds, radios screaming coordinates. Claire reached the landing zone just as Wilson shoved Rodriguez onto the ramp. She turned to see Doc Williams stumble behind, one hand on the wall for balance. "Doc, go." Williams hesitated, looking back toward the tunnel. "We left our dead down there." Claire grabbed her hand. "We honor them by living, move." A burst of gunfire tore through the dirt near their feet. Gonzalez fired back, covering them as they ran the last 10 meters. Hands reached from the helicopter, Jake pulling Claire up, Wilson hauling Williams. The ramp slammed shut. "Clear, we're clear." "Raven 1, go." The helicopter surged upward, the desert rushing away beneath them. Tracers streaked through the night like red comets. One hit the tail plating, another ricocheted off the side door. Then suddenly, open sky, distance, silence broken only by the heavy thrum of engines. Inside the cabin, Claire fell to her knees beside her patients. The floor vibrated beneath her palms. Rodriguez unconscious, Chen still breathing shallow, Williams gripping her hand tight. Jake crouched beside her, all accounted for. She checked quickly, pulses, pupils lined secure. Alive, all alive. Wilson laughed once, disbelieving. "After 7 years, that's one hell of a miracle." Claire shook her head. "Not a miracle, just unfinished business." Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, soft gold breaking through clouds of smoke. It painted the inside of the helicopter with light, catching the blood on her gloves, turning it almost beautiful. She looked down at her patients, their breathing slow but steady, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Back at the forward staging base, med crews rushed to meet them. The rescued team was carried out on stretchers, IVs swinging, medics shouting vitals. Claire followed last, body numb, mind blank. When her boots hit solid ground, she finally exhaled. Jake came up beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You did it." She looked at the distant mountains, the same ridges that had once swallowed everything she loved. "No," she said softly, "we did." Hours later, after the chaos of surgery and debriefings, Claire stood outside the field hospital watching the sun set behind the wire fences. The sky glowed red and purple, dust swirling in the light. Somewhere behind her, the sound of laughter, Rodriguez awake again, cracking jokes through the pain. Doc Williams would recover. Chen would need months of rehab but would live, all of them alive, all because she'd come back. But peace never stayed long. A comms officer approached, saluted. "Commander Mitchell, encrypted transmission for you, priority 1. She accepted the tablet, eyes scanning the message. One line froze her breath. Additional survivors located. Unknown location. Mission extension required. She closed the file slowly. The wind tugged at her hair. The desert stretched endless and silent. Jake appeared beside her. "Bad news." She smiled faintly. "Depends on how you define bad." He studied her expression, then nodded. "You're going back, aren't you?" She looked at the horizon again, where day bled into night. "Some promises don't end with rescue," she said quietly. "Some are just beginning." The last light faded, leaving the desert wrapped in dusk. Claire turned toward the base lights and walked back into the noise, already preparing for whatever waited beyond the next mission. Her scars ached under the bandages, but her hands were steady. Always steady. The desert was quiet again. Too quiet. 3 days had passed since the rescue, yet the sound of rotor blades still echoed in Claire's dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that tunnel. The heat, the blood, the sound of a man gasping for air. And every time she woke, she half expected to find her gloves still wet. But they were clean now. Too clean. At forward operating base Chapman, life had resumed its pattern. Supply trucks rolled in, troops ate in silence, the wounded healed, the living moved on. Claire hadn't, not yet. She stood alone near the helipad that morning, the wind tugging at her uniform. Behind her, the base stretched like a small city of canvas and steel, buzzing with order and exhaustion. Ahead of her lay the open desert, limitless, empty, free. But she wasn't free. Not from memory. Not from the weight of being needed again. A voice called from behind her, "Commander Mitchell." She turned. A young Marine jogged over, breath fogging in the cool air. "Ma'am, Admiral Richardson's in the command tent. He's requesting you personally." Claire gave a small nod. "Tell him I'll be there." Inside, the tent smelled of dust and paperwork, coffee gone cold, ink smeared by tired hands. Admiral Richardson stood over a table cluttered with maps, his uniform sharp even in the desert heat. He looked up when she entered and smiled faintly. "I should have known you'd make it out," he said. "Again." "Old habits," Claire replied. He motioned for her to sit. "Reports say 3 survivors, no casualties on your team." "That's correct." He exhaled, relief cutting through his command tone. "You pulled off the impossible, again." "I had help," she said softly. "Good people." He studied her for a moment, the calm in her eyes, the fatigue beneath it. "Do you ever stop?" Claire tilted her head. "From what?" "Carrying the world like it's your patient," he said. She didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. No, she didn't stop. If she stopped, everything inside her would start falling apart. The Admiral slid a folder across the table. "Command wants you to debrief in Bagram, then return to Bethesda for reassignment. You've earned rest, Commander, maybe even a desk job." She opened the folder but didn't look at the pages. "I'm not built for desks, sir." Richardson smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I asked them to keep you in the field." Her eyes lifted. "You did. You've saved more lives than anyone I've ever met. The Navy needs people like you, especially women like you. Leaders who know what sacrifice actually costs." She hesitated. "With respect, sir, leadership doesn't need more faces on posters. It needs more hands in the dirt." "Spoken like a medic," he said. "Spoken like someone who knows what happens when you start believing your own legend." Richardson's expression softened. "You're too hard on yourself." "No," she said quietly. "I'm just honest." Later, as she left the tent, Captain Rodriguez was waiting outside on crutches, his uniform loose from weight loss but his grin intact. "Permission to walk you to the mess hall, Commander." She smiled despite herself. Permission granted. They moved slowly, the sun casting long shadows behind them. Soldiers nodded as she passed, some saluting, some just staring, unsure if they were supposed to. Word of her rescue had spread far beyond the base. The ghost medic of Station Alpha was no longer a rumor. Rodriguez noticed the stares. "You realize half these people think you're immortal now." "Immortal people don't have nightmares," she said. He gave her a knowing look, still having them. "Every night." He stopped walking. "You want advice?" "From a man who nearly died twice this week, sure." "Don't fight them," he said. "Dreams are just your brain trying to say what your mouth won't." She met his gaze. "And what if I don't want to hear it?" "Then you'll never sleep." For the first time in days, she laughed, a quiet, broken sound that somehow felt good. Inside the mess hall, Doc Williams and Lieutenant Chen were seated at a table, plates of untouched food in front of them. Williams raised her good arm in greeting. "Look who survived another miracle." Claire sat across from them. "You both look better." "Feels strange to eat without counting rations," Chen said softly. "The quiet's louder than I remember." Claire nodded. "That's how it starts, feels too calm, then one sound, just one, takes you right back." William stirred her coffee. "You think it ever really goes away?" "No," Claire said. "You just learn to live with the echoes." Chen hesitated, then asked, "When they found us, what made you come, after all this time?" Claire looked down at her hands. "Because I never stopped seeing your faces. Because leaving people behind hurts worse than dying." No one spoke for a moment. Then William said, "You realize that's why no one can ever replace you." Claire smiled faintly. "Good, I'm not looking for replacements." That night she walked alone along the perimeter fence. The desert was alive with sound, the low hum of generators, the crackle of radio chatter, the distant thunder of artillery. Yet she found calm in the rhythm of it. The sky above was endless, stars sharp as glass, moon hanging low. She pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the faint texture of the old scars beneath her uniform. The Admiral's words echoed in her head. "The Navy needs people like you." Maybe, but she wasn't sure she had much left to give. As she stood there, Jake approached, hands tucked into his vest pockets. "Can't sleep." She glanced over. "You always assume that." "With you it's a safe bet," he said, smiling. They stood side by side, watching the horizon. After a long silence, Jake said, "You know, some of the younger corpsmen are calling you the Rib Saint." Claire frowned. "The what?" "You stitched a collapsed lung in the dark under fire," he said with a grin, "and survived 2 sieges. Rumor travels fast." She sighed. "I don't want sainthood. I want competence." "Well, you've got that covered," he said. Then more seriously, "Command, offering you full reinstatement, medical lead on future extractions. You taking it?" She was quiet for a moment. "I haven't decided." "Why not?" "Because every time I say yes to another mission," she said softly, "I lose another piece of myself." Jake nodded. "Yeah, but every time you say no, someone else loses their life." They stood there in silence, the truth between them as heavy as the desert air. The following morning, Claire packed her few belongings, her battered med kit, her field journal, and a small photo she'd carried since Alpha. It showed 6 people smiling in front of the original medical station, before the siege, before the ghosts. 3 of them were dead now. 3 she just brought home. She slipped the photo into her pocket. Before leaving, she visited the infirmary. Williams was asleep. Chen was sitting up, sketching something in her notebook, an outline of hands holding a heart made of barbed wire. Claire smiled. "That's beautiful." "It's you," Chen said simply. You hold people together even when it hurts. Claire's throat tightened. Then draw something else. This one's too true. Chen laughed softly. You're leaving again, aren't you? Claire hesitated, then nodded. There's talk of more survivors. Maybe. I need to see it through. Chen looked down at her sketch. You'll come back. I always do, Claire said. But the words didn't sound convincing, not even to her. By noon, she was at the airstrip. Rodriguez, now bandaged but upright, limped over to see her off. Guess you don't do goodbye parties. Never liked confetti, she said. He offered his hand. For what it's worth, I wouldn't have made it if you hadn't come back. She shook it. You'd have done the same. Not like that, he said. Not with that calm. You've got something in you, Mitchell. Something the rest of us are still trying to understand. Don't try to, she said softly. It's not peace, it's purpose. The plane engines roared to life. She climbed aboard, taking one last look at the desert base below, the tents, the landing pads, the fatting smoke trails of war. Every scar, every silence, every heartbeat she'd saved, it was all here. Part of her. Forever. She strapped in as the aircraft began to taxi. Outside, the horizon shimmered in the heat, an endless road of dust and memory. As they lifted off, the desert grew smaller, but her chest didn't feel lighter. The ghosts never stayed buried long. She looked down at her hands, steady, always steady. But the scars beneath her uniform pulsed like they remembered more than she wanted to. And somewhere deep inside her mind, a quiet voice whispered again. You're not done yet. They told her there were more survivors. They didn't tell her the truth. The C-130 dropped into Bagram under a dirty orange sky, its engines whining against the wind. Claire hadn't spoken during the entire flight. The other passengers, a few intelligence officers and a logistics crew, knew better than to disturb her. When the wheels touched down, she felt that familiar jolt in her ribs. The scars always ached when she landed on old ground. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was both. A jeep met her on the tarmac, engine idling. The driver, a young corporal, saluted. Commander Mitchell, you're wanted in Intel Briefing Room 3, ma'am, immediately. Claire nodded. Lead the way. The building was small, windowless, the kind that swallowed secrets. Inside, cold fluorescent light replaced the sun, and the air smelled faintly of paper and tension. A digital clock ticked above the door, 14:00 hours exactly. 3 people waited inside. Colonel Marcus Steele, whom she hadn't seen since the rescue, an analyst she didn't know, and a civilian in a dark suit whose presence screamed Washington. Commander Mitchell, Steele greeted. You look like hell. Feels mutual, she said, sitting. So, survivors. The civilian leaned forward. Before we go further, understand that this briefing is classified at the Omega level. What you hear here doesn't leave this room. Claire's expression didn't change. Understood. The analyst tapped a keyboard, and the screen behind them flickered to life. Grainy satellite footage. A facility buried in mountains. 2 days ago, he began, drone reconnaissance captured these images. Location matches the remains of Outpost 9, 70 miles northeast of your last operation. Same architecture as Station Alpha. Initial thermal scans indicated multiple heat signatures. How many? Claire asked. 7 possibly prisoners, but he hesitated. We can't confirm their hours. Steele cleared his throat. Intel Command believes this site may not be a prison at all. We think it's an experimental facility. Claire frowned. Experimental for what? Medical operations, the civilian said flatly. Research conducted on captured personnel, biological studies involving surgical precision. Her chest tightened. You're saying they're using our people as test subjects? That's the theory, Steele said. And the only person with the experience and access clearance to confirm or refute it is you. The words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. She stared at the screen, images blurring, concrete structures, metal doors, shadows moving. It looked so much like Alpha that her stomach turned. "Who gave clearance for this?" she asked quietly. "Joint Command," the civilian said. "You'll lead the medical verification. The SEAL team from the previous mission will accompany you again. Same insertion, different target." Claire's jaw tightened. "Verification, not rescue." "Correct. Your orders are to collect evidence, identify victims, and confirm operations for tribunal documentation." She leaned forward. "If there are people alive in there, I'm getting them out." "That's not part of your directive," the man said sharply. "Then rewrite it," she shot back. Steele sighed. "Claire." "No," she said, eyes cold. "I'm not flying across another desert to count bodies while command debates paperwork." The room fell silent. The civilian finally said, "You'll follow orders, Commander. That's why you're still in uniform." Claire's voice dropped low. "No, I'm in uniform because people still need saving. Orders are optional when they conflict with humanity." Steele's expression softened slightly. He'd seen that look before, the same fire that had saved his men years ago, the same defiance that had nearly cost her career. He gave a small nod. "Understood, but if you go off book, you're on your own." "Wouldn't be the first time," she said, standing. Back at the hangar, Jake was already waiting by the Blackhawk, helmet tucked under one arm. He grinned when he saw her. "Heard we've got a new party invite." "You could call it that," she said. "Same setup." "Not quite. Command calling it a verification mission." He raised an eyebrow. "Which means?" "Which means they don't expect survivors." Jake's grin faded. "And you?" "I don't expect anything," she said, "but I'm bringing extra med kits." They lifted off before dusk. The landscape rolled beneath them, mountains jagged as broken teeth, valleys painted red by the dying light. Claire sat by the open hatch, wind tearing through her hair, eyes locked on the horizon. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Jake asked quietly, "You ever wonder why you're still doing this?" She didn't look at him. "Because someone has to." He nodded slowly. "And if it kills you?" She gave a half smile. "Then at least it won't surprise me." The approach was brutal. Thin air, narrow canyons, radar shadows. They set down 5 miles out and continued on foot, night vision cutting the darkness into green ghosts. The facility appeared out of the mountain itself. A single steel door carved into stone, no windows, no light. Silent as a tomb. Wilson muttered, "Looks like no one's home." Claire knelt beside the entrance, brushing away sand from a small keypad. "No power, they're running silent." Gonzalez inspected the hinges. "Explosives." "Too loud," Jake said. "We'll find another way." They circled along the cliff until Claire spotted a narrow ventilation shaft half buried in debris. "Here," she said. "It leads inside." Jake peered down the opening. "Commander, that's barely wide enough for you." "I've crawled through worse." Before anyone could stop her, she dropped to her stomach and slid in. The metal scraped against her uniform. Darkness swallowed her whole. Inside, the air was stale, chemical wrong. She crawled forward until the shaft opened into a maintenance corridor lined with flickering lights. Everything looked abandoned, yet something about the silence felt staged. "Entry clear," she whispered into her mic. One by one, the SEALs followed. They moved deeper room by room, their flashlights sweeping across walls marked with strange symbols, half-burned files, empty cages. Then faintly a noise, a soft, rhythmic beeping. Claire froze, heart monitor. She followed the sound into a chamber filled with makeshift medical tables. On one of them lay a man, emaciated, eyes covered, IV lines running into both arms, still alive. "Oh God," she breathed. She rushed forward, checking vitals, pulse weak but steady, oxygen low. The tags on his wrist were in English. U.S. Marine Capt. Daniel Howe. Jake's voice cracked through her earpiece. Claire, we've got more of them, 2 rooms over. She looked around, the charts, the surgical instruments, the stains on the floor. This wasn't captivity. This was experimentation. Her stomach turned. How long have they been doing this? Gonzalez stepped in, eyes wide. Commander, you need to see this. Claire followed her into the next chamber and froze. The walls were lined with jars. Inside each one, tissue samples, organs, labeled with codes. Some tags bore familiar call signs. Viper Unit, Alpha Division. Her hands began to shake. Jake's voice cut through the silence. Command wants an update. Claire swallowed hard. Tell them they were right, but tell them there are survivors and we're bringing them home. Copy that, he said. Then static, another voice unfamiliar, sharp. Negative, Viper 7. Extraction authorization denied. Do not engage in recovery. Repeat, do not recover personnel. Claire stared at the radio, disbelief hardening into fury. Say that again. Mission parameters are verification only. Leave the subjects. Destroy the facility upon exit. She ripped the headset off, her voice rising. They're human beings, not evidence. Jake looked at her. What now? What we came for, she said. We saved them. They moved fast, disconnecting IV lines, loading the barely conscious captives onto stretchers. Wilson rigged comms interference. Gonzalez placed charges only at the outer walls, avoiding medical zones. Then the alarm, motion sensors tripped, red lights flooded the halls. Contact, Jake shouted. We've got hostiles. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the metal walls. Claire dropped beside the nearest patient, shielding him with her body as bullets tore through the air. Wilson returned fire, short bursts, methodical. 2 down, he called. But there were more. Smoke filled the corridor. Claire felt something hot graze her shoulder, a bullet close enough to burn. She ignored it, dragging the Marine toward cover. Jake fired from the doorway. We're running out of time. Then make time, she yelled, hauling another survivor onto her shoulder. Her lungs screamed for air, her ribs flaring with pain. She kept moving, always moving. Wilson's voice over comms. Extraction point in sight, 30 seconds. They burst through the main door into the cold night. The Blackhawk waited, blades slicing the darkness. Gunfire chased them from behind. Claire threw herself onto the ramp, pulling the last stretcher with her. Go, go. The helicopter lifted off as explosions ripped through the facility below, charges detonating, flames blooming against the mountain. The inferno swallowed the past once more. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was chaos, blood, dust, the sound of groaning survivors. Claire worked mechanically, sealing wounds, stabilizing vitals, shouting for bandages she didn't have. Jake knelt beside her, gripping the headset, command demanding confirmation. Claire looked at him, eyes cold. Tell them mission failed, no survivors. He hesitated. You sure? Positive, she said. We didn't find anyone worth reporting. He gave a small nod. Understood. He relayed the message, then removed the earpiece. Signal cut. For a moment the noise faded. Only the rotor blades remained, a steady, merciful heartbeat in the sky. Claire sat back, breathing hard. Her shoulder throbbed, blood seeping through her sleeve. Across from her, one of the rescued soldiers opened his eyes weakly, lips trembling. Ma'am, where are we? She leaned close. Home, she whispered. You're going home. He smiled faintly before sleep took him again. When they landed, command was waiting. But before anyone could reach her, Claire walked straight past them, coat torn, face streaked with blood and dust. She didn't salute, didn't speak, just kept walking until the night swallowed her. Because some orders aren't meant to be followed, and some truths aren't meant to be filed. The debrief room smelled like disinfectant and lies. Always did. Claire sat alone at the steel table, one arm wrapped in a pressure bandage, the other resting beside a cup of untouched coffee. A camera blinked red in the corner. Somewhere behind the one-way glass, people she'd never met were already writing her story for her. The door opened. Colonel Marcus Steele stepped in, hat under his arm, expression carved from stone. "Commander Mitchell," he said quietly, "they're not happy." She didn't look up. "You'll have to be more specific. Who, they this week?" "Command, the agency. Probably God if he's keeping score." Claire almost smiled. "He stopped keeping score when we started calling orders mercy." Steele sighed, pulled a chair across from her, and sat. "You disobeyed a direct directive." "I saved 7 people. And destroyed a classified facility. It was a slaughterhouse." He hesitated, then said softly, "I know, but they don't care about that." Hours blurred, questions piled, voices changed. The suits came in waves, first polite, then sharp, then surgical. "Who authorized the deviation? Did you obtain data? Were the subjects cooperative?" Each question sounded like a verdict waiting for a signature. She gave the same answer every time. "I followed my oath, not your script." Eventually, they left her alone again. Silence filled the room, thick, humming, alive. She stared at her reflection in the glass. The bandages, the tired eyes, the faint tremor in her fingers. The ghost medic, the rib saint. All the names people gave her to make her sacrifices sound beautiful. None of them were her. When the door opened next, Admiral Richardson walked in. He didn't salute, didn't smile. Just looked at her with the weary disappointment of a man who'd seen too much truth for one lifetime. "They're considering court-martial," he said flatly. Claire leaned back. "For saving prisoners. For defying mission protocol." "That's just another way of saying I had a conscience." Richardson rubbed his temples. "You think I don't get it? I read the files. I saw those reports before they were scrubbed. You were right to go in, but right doesn't matter anymore. Optics do." She studied him. "And what do you care more about, Admiral, optics or truth?" He didn't answer. Later, after hours of silence and paper forms, Steele came to her quarters. He didn't knock, just stepped inside and shut the door. "They're splitting the difference," he said. "No charges, but they're grounding you. Indefinite leave. You'll keep your rank, lose your wings." Claire nodded slowly. "A quiet burial. Could have been worse. Could have been honest." Steele hesitated. "You want honesty? Fine. Command's terrified. Those files you grabbed from that base, the ones you shouldn't even have, prove everything we've denied for years. They can't risk you talking." She met his eyes. "Then they shouldn't have taught me to tell the truth under oath." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on her cot, laptop open, reading the encrypted data she'd copied during the mission. It wasn't just medical logs. It was authorization orders, signatures from contractors, pharmaceutical companies, government branches that weren't supposed to exist. Every name she scrolled past was another nail in a coffin someone had paid to keep closed. Her hand hovered over the transmit key and upload to the press, to the world. One click, and the truth would burn brighter than any explosion. She closed the laptop. Not yet. Because truth without timing was just noise. And she wasn't ready to watch good people get crushed by the fallout. The following morning, a knock on the door. Jake stood there, clean uniform, same calm grin. "Heard you're leaving." "Guess I am." He looked around her nearly empty room. "Any idea where you'll go?" "Anywhere that doesn't require a salute." He smirked. "That narrows it down to about 2 places on Earth." She threw the strap of her med bag over her shoulder. "You're staying." "For now. Command offered me your slot, said I'd be leading new extraction units." She stopped, "And you said yes." "Someone has to keep doing what you started." She nodded slowly. "Then make sure they remember what the job really is." Jake's smile faded. "And what's that?" "To leave no one behind," she said quietly, "even when the orders say otherwise." The jeep ride to the airstrip felt longer than the mission itself. Every checkpoint, every salute, every stretch of razor wire looked like a piece of the life she was shedding. As the plane waited under the sun, Admiral Richardson appeared one last time, hat tucked beneath his arm. "You're a stubborn woman, Mitchell," he said. "Occupational hazard." He handed her an envelope. "This came through unofficial channels. I shouldn't be giving it to you." She opened it. Inside, a letter handwritten, signed by Colonel Steele. "The men and women you saved are safe. Their stories are sealed, but their lives are real because of you. Some debts can't be repaid. Some truth doesn't need witnesses." Them. She folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket. "Thank you." Richardson studied her. "You could still fight this. There are hearings, appeals." "I've fought enough," she said. "Sometimes you win by walking away." He nodded, eyes tired. "You'll always have my respect, Commander." She smiled faintly. "Then keep it quiet. Respect makes people nervous." He laughed once, short, genuine, and stepped back as she climbed the ramp. 30 minutes later, the plane lifted into the haze. Below her, Afghanistan unspooled like an old wound finally closing. Mountains, sand, blood, ghosts, all fading into distance. She reached into her pocket, unfolded the letter again, then pulled out something else. A small, cracked photo from the early days at Station Alpha. The team smiling, sunlight in their eyes, hope in their hands. 5 faces. 2 gone. 3 saved. She pressed her fingers against the image, tracing the outline of each. "You made it," she whispered. "All of you." Then she closed her eyes. For a long time, the only sound was the drone of the engines, and the steady heartbeat she could still feel through the metal floor. Somewhere far below, the desert wind erased their footprints, one by one. And for the first time in years, she didn't stop it. Weeks later, in a small apartment overlooking the Virginia coastline, Clare Mitchell lived quietly. No uniform, no rank, just ocean and silence. She volunteered twice a week at a free clinic, patching up kids who scraped their knees, veterans who couldn't sleep, mothers who just needed someone to listen. She never told them who she'd been. Sometimes, when the radio played a news report about unconfirmed operations overseas, she would glance out at the sea and think of the men and women she'd saved, and those she hadn't. And every night before she slept, she'd open that same old photo, place it beside her bed, and whisper the same promise. Never again. One evening, months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, one line typed unsigned. "There are others, same coordinates. Need a medic we can trust." She sat for a long time staring at it, waves crashing outside her window. Her heartbeat slowed, then steadied. She stood, reached for her battered med kit, brushed dust from the strap. Same bag, same hand, same scars. She slipped on her jacket and looked once more at the sea. "Not done yet," she whispered. Then she walked out the door. The ocean had a sound she'd almost forgotten. Not the crash of waves, but the rhythm beneath, steady, ancient, like the heartbeat of something that had seen every war and forgiven every wound. Clare stood at the edge of the Virginia shoreline, morning wind cutting across her face, the taste of salt and memory in the air. The letter from the unmarked envelope sat folded in her hand, edges worn from how many times she'd read it. "There are others, same coordinates. Need a medic we can trust." She should have thrown it away. Burned it. Ignored it. But she didn't. Because some messages aren't calls for help, they're mirrors. And when she looked into this one, she saw herself staring back. By the next evening, she was on a transport heading east again. Not in uniform, not under orders, just a quiet passenger among strangers. The world outside the window was cloud and light, and for once, she didn't feel like she was chasing ghosts. She was chasing closure. Marcus Steele met her at the landing zone. He'd aged, they both had, but his voice was still the same, gravel wrapped in loyalty. "You never could sit still, could you?" he said. "Stillness makes the noise louder," she replied. He handed her a dossier. "Unofficially, there's a camp 3 clicks outside the valley. Leftovers from the same network you burned down. They're moving captives again, medics, engineers, civilians. We're calling this cleanup." "Unofficially," she repeated, taking the folder. "And officially." He hesitated. "Officially, this mission doesn't exist. You step into this one, you're gone from the books, for good." Claire studied him. "Maybe that's the point." He nodded slowly. "Then we both know what that means." "Yeah," she said softly. "No one comes home from this one." The next night, the moon was just a thin blade of light cutting across the clouds. The world smelled of dust, oil, and danger. She met the team at the drop zone. 4 faces she didn't know, all younger, all watching her like she was a legend they'd grown up hearing about. None dared say her name. She just nodded once. "We're in," no noise, no second chances. They moved through the dark like ghosts, silent, steady, invisible. The desert stretched endless around them, the mountains waiting like sentinels. Claire's hands didn't shake anymore. They hadn't in years, but her chest, that still hurt sometimes. The old injury, the old reminder that survival comes with interest. The facility came into view at 200 hours. Low walls, faded tents, floodlights sweeping lazily across the perimeter. Claire crouched behind a ridge, binoculars steady. 2 guards by the east gate, 2 more by the tower, minimal patrol rotation every 12 minutes. Jake's voice in her memory, "You always see patterns before the rest of us." She exhaled, because chaos always hides inside a pattern. She signaled the team. They moved on her mark, precise, flawless. Within minutes, they were inside the compound. And then she heard it. A sound that cut through the silence like a heartbeat in a tomb. A child crying. Her pulse quickened. She followed the sound through the maze of tents until she reached a small medical enclosure. Inside, not soldiers, not operatives, families. Women and children, gaunt and frightened, huddled beneath dirty blankets. Her breath caught. "Oh my God." One of the younger soldiers whispered, "We were told this was a lab." "It's a prison," Claire said. "Same pattern, different victims." She moved quickly from one to another, checking vitals, assessing wounds, whispering calm. They looked at her with eyes too old for their faces. Fear. Hope. Recognition. She'd seen that look before, from Marines, from medics, from the broken who still wanted to live. She turned to her team. "We extract everyone, every last one." "Commander," one of them said, "we don't have capacity for." "Then make capacity," she said, "because leaving them here isn't an option." They started moving the civilians toward the outer gates, staying low, working fast. But someone always notices, someone always hears. The first shot shattered the night. Then the sirens. Gunfire erupted from the watchtower, wild, desperate, chaotic. Claire dove behind a barrier, adrenaline snapping her senses into focus. "Cover the civilians," she shouted. Her team returned fire, coordinated and lethal. A bullet ripped through her sleeve, grazing her arm, but she barely felt it. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning routes, assessing casualties, triaging the impossible. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, fell to the ground, crying out as shrapnel tore into her leg. Claire ran without thinking. Dropped to her knees. Pressed her hands against the wound. "Look at me," she said softly. "You're going to be okay. What's your name?" The girl sobbed, "Aya." "Okay, Aya. You hold on to my hand, all right. Don't let go." Claire lifted her into her arms and started running toward the smoke, toward the exit, toward whatever counted as safety. They reached the extraction point under fire. The helicopter blades whipped sand and debris into a storm around them. The civilians climbed aboard one by one, crying, clutching, alive. Claire handed Aya to one of the medics on the ramp. "She's got a femoral nick. Clamp it and push fluids." "Got it." "Where's the commander?" one of the soldiers yelled. Claire turned back toward the compound. "Still inside." "Ma'am, we have to go." "Not yet," she said. There were still two unaccounted for, one mother, one boy. She'd seen them in the tent, hiding behind the bed frame. She couldn't leave them. "Commander, you can't." She was already running. The world inside the compound was fire and dust. She found them exactly where she'd last seen them, the boy coughing, the mother barely conscious. She grabbed the boy first, then the woman, half carrying, half dragging them toward the gate. A figure stepped out from the smoke, a guard rifle raised. Time slowed. For 1 second, Claire saw his eyes, young, scared, human. She didn't fire. She pushed the boy behind her, braced for the shot that didn't come. Because Jake was there. Not in flesh, not in voice, but memory. "Move, Commander. You don't freeze, not now." She moved. A single shot, not hers, dropped the guard. Gonzalez's voice in her earpiece. "You owe me one, ma'am." "Add it to the list," Claire said, breathless. She reached the helicopter just as the engine screamed at full power. The pilot yelled, "We've got to lift off now." "Go," she shouted, throwing herself onto the ramp with the last of her strength. The chopper rose, bullets chasing them through the haze until the desert fell silent again beneath them. Claire leaned back against the cabin wall, lungs burning, arms shaking from exhaustion. Around her, the rescued civilians huddled together, crying, praying, whispering her name like she was some kind of myth. She wasn't a myth. She was just tired. Aya reached over from the medic's lap, small fingers brushing Claire's bandaged arm. "You're bleeding." Claire smiled weakly. "Happens sometimes." The girl looked up at her. "You're not scared." Claire shook her head. "Of course I am, that's why I don't stop." Hours later, back at a secret forward camp, the survivors were unloaded. Medics rushed forward, supplies flew, orders shouted. Claire stayed behind in the helicopter, staring out into the fading dawn. Her shoulder hurt, her ribs ached, her scars burned. But her heart, for the first time in years, felt still. Steele approached from the tarmac, hands in his pockets. "You realize this makes you an international ghost again." She didn't turn, never really stopped being one. He exhaled. "We'll keep them safe off the grid." "I know," she said. He hesitated. "And you, what now?" She looked at the horizon. The light was gold now, that fleeting moment between night and day when everything looks clean again. "What I always do," she said quietly, "disappear before the applause." He almost smiled. "You think anyone's applauding?" "Someone always is," she said. "They just don't say it out loud." That evening, she walked alone down a dirt path behind the camp. The air was warm, filled with the faint scent of diesel and flowers that somehow survived the war. She stopped at the edge of a dried riverbed and sat down, the sunset bleeding over the horizon like fire cooling into peace. She took the cracked photo from her pocket again, the team from Alpha. She laid it in the dirt beside her and whispered their names, one by one. Then she added the new ones, the ones she'd just saved. The list was long now. Too long. But it wasn't about numbers. It was about lives that would wake up tomorrow because she didn't quit today. As night fell, a convoy prepared to move the rescued family south. Aya leaned out from one of the vehicles, waving a small bandaged hand. Claire lifted hers in return. "Thank you," the girl shouted over the engine noise. Claire smiled. "No, Aya, thank you." When the last vehicle disappeared into the desert, she finally let herself breathe. The air was quiet. The stars were sharp again. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had stitched, carried, saved, bled. Hands that would never be clean again, but never stopped doing good. She whispered half to the wind, half to herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Fade out. A slow shot of the empty desert. The echo of rotor blades fades into silence. And somewhere in that silence, a heartbeat. Steady. Enduring. Alive. Because legends don't start as heroes. They start as medics who refuse to walk away.